Iran may have announced continuity while the man chosen to embody it was already too compromised to rule. The most explosive reporting in this story says Mojtaba Khamenei is in QM in severe condition and unable to take part in regime decision-making. If that is true, then the succession did not calm the system down. It concealed the fact that the next crisis had already begun. The line that matters most is not that Mojtaba is reportedly wounded. It is that he is reportedly unable to be involved in any decision-making by the regime. That turns this from a health scare into a wartime command problem. Because a supreme leader who cannot decide is not stabilizing the state. He is being used to mask instability inside it. Even the softer version of the story is alarming. The reassuring line says Mojtaba Khamenei is still in Iran, but is avoiding public appearances for understandable reasons, which means the regime wants everyone to believe he is present, active, and commanding while still refusing the one act that would shut this panic down fast, showing him clearly, directly, and in control. If you want the layer of the story that governments, channels, and official briefings keep trying to smother, subscribe now. And then tell me in the comments the question this entire crisis is really asking. If Mojtaba cannot rule, who in Tehran is ruling through him? Iran did not show its new supreme leader delivering his first message to the country. A presenter read the statement on state television beside a still image of Mojtaba Khamenei, with no audio and no video of the new leader himself. That is not how a secure wartime regime projects continuity. That is how a regime tries to keep authority visible after the man behind it has become a problem. That image should stay in your head, because it is the human anchor of the entire story. Not the ruler speaking, not the ruler appearing, not the ruler commanding, another man speaking for him. Once a state has to mediate supreme authority through substitutes, the public is no longer looking at normal leadership. It is looking at a possible cover structure. And that is why the title is stronger than it first sounds. Reported unconscious in QM is only the entry point. The real blast radius is in the second half succession. Panic starts again. Because the public announcement of continuity and the visible proof of continuity are no longer matching each other, Mojtaba Khamenei was announced as successor in a rush designed to send one message above all others. The chain of command had already been restored. He was presented as the direct continuation of the late supreme leader. The signal that the system had taken the hit and remained intact. That fast succession was supposed to end doubt before doubt had time to organize. But a rushed succession can close a procedural gap without ever creating real authority. It can produce a title, a ceremony, a legal mechanism, a slogan, even a wave of forced public loyalty, and still fail to generate the one thing a wartime ruler actually needs, which is belief. If belief does not arrive, panic does. And panic in systems like this does not begin with public screaming. It begins with missing appearances, mediated statements, elite uncertainty, whispered alternatives, and a sudden obsession with who is really authorizing what. That is why this story feels bigger than the memo. The memo did not create the instability. It landed on top of instability that was already breathing. The first visible crack came almost immediately. Nearly 48 hours after his selection, Mojtaba still had not issued a statement, while reporting tied his installation to pressure from the Revolutionary Guards. That is a devastating opening condition for any new ruler, because it makes him look less like the uncontested center of power and more like the product of urgency, force, and unfinished bargaining. That matters because the system was not introducing Mojtaba in peacetime. It was introducing him under maximum pressure, under the eyes of enemies, loyalists, clerics, and security institutions that all needed something different from him. At once in that environment, even a small absence becomes politically radioactive. The safest version of events says this is just security management. The regime's defenders can argue that a new supreme leader under obvious assassination risk does not need to appear publicly to remain real. That argument is not absurd. It is simply not enough. Because a state under this much stress does not repeatedly avoid its strongest proof unless that proof has become dangerous to use. If the cleanest way to end the rumors is still being avoided, then the regime is telling you something even when it thinks it is withholding something. Mojtaba's profile ties together the two institutions that define this crisis. He is deeply linked to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and his path also runs through QAM, the preeminent center of Shia clerical study and legitimacy. So if he is now reportedly hidden in QAM while the guards remain the regime's hardest and most operationally coherent institution, the story stops being a rumor about one man and becomes a struggle over which pillar is actually holding the state up. That is why QOM is not a backdrop. QOM is where religious legitimacy is concentrated, where clerical authority is not only taught but sanctified, where the state's sacred layer is supposed to feel heavier than its military layer. So if the reported location is true, then the city of legitimacy and the image of incapacity have now fused into one terrifying symbol. That symbol matters because it changes the emotional logic of the title. The public is no longer just asking whether Mojtaba is hurt. The public is asking whether the regime's holy center has become the place where continuity itself is being medically, politically, or theatrically kept alive. The first attributed message deepened the doubt instead of killing it. It was read on state television rather than delivered live or on video, which meant the regime was asking the public to accept wartime resolve from a ruler they still could not directly see or hear. That does not feel like a confident sovereign speaking to his nation. It feels like authority being performed at one remove. And once you notice that pattern, you cannot unsee it. A secure ruler appears. A wounded but functioning ruler records something. A ruler who cannot safely be shown gets reduced to text, ceremony, still images, and attributed words. Tehran is telling this story from the lowest rung of visibility that still lets it pretend the top office remains fully occupied. That is where the second succession panic lives, not in one line from one memo, but in the widening gap between title and embodiment. Mojtaba has the title. The regime has not convincingly shown the embodiment. In a system built as much on aura as on institutions, that is not a cosmetic problem. That is corrosive. Inside Iran, that suspicion is already visible in plain language. People speaking from Tehran are saying it feels like control is in the hands of the IRGC, which means the public is not reading Mojtaba's absence as a private medical issue anymore. It is being read as evidence that the official hierarchy may still exist on paper while real operational authority is sitting somewhere harder, darker, and less visible. And public instinct matters here more than people think. Populations living under opaque systems often cannot name the exact mechanism, but they can sense when the center of gravity has shifted. They know when speeches start feeling ghost-written, when appearances start feeling stage-managed, and when the state begins defending a title more aggressively than it demonstrates the person holding it. That is the psychological break in this story. Once people begin to suspect that supreme authority is being ventriloquized through mediators, every future message in that authority's name arrives weaker. Even genuine commands start sounding like someone else throwing their voice through the institution. One of the clearest warnings on record is that Iran could move towards something closer to a military dictatorship with a religious fig leaf. That line lands because it explains the structure underneath the rumors. If the supreme leader remains symbolically necessary but physically absent, politically dependent, or operationally compromised, then the clerical top layer does not disappear, and it becomes cover for the security state beneath it. And that is the exact scenario. The regime cannot afford the public to name out loud, because once succession starts looking less like a transfer of supreme authority and more like the preservation of clerical branding around a harder military core, the entire ideological architecture begins to wobble. The robe stays. The source of power changes. Now, the dangerous part, even the good version of the story does not actually relax the stakes. Suppose Mojtaba is not unconscious. Suppose he is alive, conscious, hidden for security reasons, and still able to receive briefings and issue direction. That does not automatically restore calm. It simply changes the nature of the danger. The strategic forecast for a functioning Mojtaba is not moderation, not flexibility, and not institutional healing. It is defiant consolidation, tighter reliance on the IRGC, harder coercive instruments, and a leadership style built around siege logic, survival, and force. So if Mojtaba is active, the likely risk is a harsher wartime system. If he is inactive, the likely risk is a harsher wartime system acting through his name. That is the trap at the heart of this title. There is no soft exit. If the unconscious in Quam reporting is true, then the regime is masking a second succession emergency inside a live conflict. If it is false, the regime still looks weak because it has failed the simplest possible test of sovereign reassurance to produce the ruler and make the reality undeniable. And that is why the title promise is real. The audience clicked because they wanted to know whether Iran might already be leaderless again, whether the man declared as proof of continuity may already be unable to perform the role that uncontinuity requires. The answer is not that the case is settled. The answer is that the regime's own behavior has made the fear rational. Succession panic starts again because succession was announced much faster than authority was proven. It starts again because every day of mediated presence keeps reopening the question that the appointment was supposed to close. It starts again because in moments like this, the difference between the leader exists and the leader rules becomes the most dangerous difference in the entire state. And states under this kind of pressure do not always freeze. Sometimes they harden, sometimes they centralize, sometimes they improvise through the institution that still feels most intact. In Iran, that institution is not hard to identify. It is the one with commanders, networks, enforcement power, and a direct stake in preserving the shell of supreme authority, even if the living center inside that shell has weakened. That is why this story should not be reduced to medical rumor or intelligence gossip. The deeper intelligence is structural. The structure says Mojtaba's absence, the format of his first message, the speed of his elevation, the reported role of the guards, and the symbolic weight of Qom all converge in one place. They converge on the possibility that the regime had to declare continuity before continuity was real. And once a regime crosses that line, the political cost keeps growing. Every attributed statement has to do more work. Every delayed appearance raises the price of the next appearance. Every denial without proof stops looking like reassurance and starts looking like managed panic at the top of the pyramid. This is also why the story feels so different from ordinary succession coverage. Ordinary succession asks who comes next. This story asks whether the next man can actually occupy the role in a way the system needs. That is a much darker question because it drags legitimacy, chain of command, internal security, and regional risk into the same room. So here is the central question answered as hard as it can be answered with the evidence we have. If Mojtaba Khamenei is truly unconscious in Qom and unable to take part in decisions, then Iran is living through a concealed second succession crisis while real authority drifts toward the security apparatus. If Mojtaba Khamenei is not unconscious, then the regime still stands exposed as a system unable or unwilling to prove normal command in the clearest possible way. Either way, the conclusion survives. Succession did not restore competence. It exposed how dependent the regime has become on managed optics, mediated authority, and the hard power waiting beneath the clerical image. The panic is not growing because one memo exists. The memo hurts because it fits the pattern too well. And that brings us back to the one image that keeps making the story worse the longer you sit with it. A presenter reading the words of the Supreme Leader while the Supreme Leader himself remains absent. That is not just a communication choice. It is the visual summary of a regime trying to keep the office alive even as doubt starts swallowing the man. If Mojtaba is down, then the state is covering a void. If Mojtaba is up, then the state is still failing to prove solidity at the exact moment it needed solidity most. In both worlds, the same deeper truth remains standing. Continuity was announced, but continuity has still not been convincingly shown. And when a regime starts ruling through the shadow of a leader, it cannot properly reveal. The people beneath that shadow matter more with every passing day than the title above them. And stay subscribed. This channel follows the real center of power long after the official story loses control of it.